Hey there, drowsy historian here. Tonight, you're not in Rome. You're not in Lisbon or Goa or anywhere safe and sun-drenched where people care what you think. No, tonight, you're a foreign missionary in Sengoku, Japan. You've got a Bible in one hand, a crucifix in the other, and the growing suspicion that no one here wants either. You think you're bringing salvation. What you're actually bringing is instability, suspicion, and the worst kind of foreign policy, the religious kind. You've barely stepped off the ship, and already your presence is an offence, but don't worry. The shogunate will handle that. Before they ask you to leave, or kneel, or burn, do me one small favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always enjoy seeing who's out there, wandering through history's darker corners with me. And if you'd like early access to more of these soothing nightmares, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to help keep this odd little history channel going, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. But for now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You arrive by sea, crammed into the hull of a Portuguese carrack that smells like salt, smoke, and wet wool. The crossing was long. You've lost count of the days, but you remember every wave. The storms were violent, the food was worse, and one poor brother never made it past Macau. He was given a quiet burial at sea, wrapped in cloth, and committed to God somewhere off the Ryukyu Islands. You said the prayers yourself, in Latin, though part of you muttered them in Portuguese. You still do that when no one's listening. It reminds you of home. You were born in Porto, raised in the church, and now you're halfway across the world, in a country you've only seen sketched in the margins of missionary reports, believing you've come to save it. You disembark in Kagoshima, a humid, mountainous coast shrouded in mist and moss. There's no ceremony, no crowd. A few dockworkers glance your way before returning to crates and mooring lines. A retainer from the local lord's household gives you a polite, unreadable bow. You bow back, a second too late and far too stiff. You're still getting used to how everything here is more precise than you expect. You wear your best black robes, heavy and clinging in the coastal heat, your crucifix glinting in the pale sun. You imagine it gives you authority. In reality, it makes you look like a merchant's chaplain, which, in the eyes of most locals, is probably all you are. You are Portuguese, and that is both a passport and a curse. The Japanese know your kind, or rather, they know the ones who came before you. Traders, smugglers, sailors, and a few men with more Bibles than good sense. You come bearing the gospel. They assume you've also brought gunpowder, and they're not entirely wrong. The captain of your ship offloaded 3 crates of matchlocks before you even finished your first prayer on land. You've been warned about this, how your mission is tied, however uncomfortably, to the trade routes that make it possible. But hearing it in theory is different from watching a daimyo's men carry muskets into a castle courtyard while you bless the ground outside it. You're following in the footsteps of Francis Xavier, the great Jesuit trailblazer whose letters are still circulated like sacred scripture back home. You memorized them in training. The hopeful tone, the careful optimism, the insistence that Japan was a land of refinement, discipline, and spiritual hunger. It was easy to believe from a desk in Lisbon. Now that you're here, Xavier feels more like a rumour than a predecessor. The locals still remember him, sort of. They call him the man with the beard who didn't understand the language and left quickly. He baptized a few hundred, preached with fire, and left before the soil turned cold around the seeds he planted. You're here to continue that work, though it already feels like walking barefoot through an unfamiliar forest. You try to speak. Your Japanese is shaky, learned from sailors and old dictionaries scribbled in the margins of Chinese scrolls. You greet a local man with a sentence you practiced for weeks. He blinks, smiles faintly, and responds in a stream of syllables that leaves you stranded. You nod, as if you understand. He nods back, as if you matter. That's how most conversations go. The cultural distance is wider than the sea you just crossed. You speak of one God, and they listen with the same expression they'd use for a foreign spice. Pungent, strange, possibly useful. They already have gods, many of them. Household spirits, mountain deities, ancestral protectors. Kami you can't pronounce and don't fully understand. You try to explain the Trinity. They nod politely, as if you've described a particularly elaborate riddle. You mention sin, they ask about rice. Still you press on. You set up a crude chapel near the harbour, little more than a wooden hut with a cloth-draped altar and a salvaged cross. You hang a bell from the doorway and ring it every morning, hoping the sound carries like it did in Lisbon. A few fishermen come to listen. One brings his son. You offer blessings, fumble through sermons, and hand out rosaries like they're seeds. You tell yourself that faith takes time, that this is how the church began, quietly among strangers. At night you write letters, reports technically, but they read like prayers. You tell your superiors that the soil is difficult but promising, that the people are curious, that the Holy Spirit is surely working, even if invisibly. You leave out the doubts, the language failures, the gnawing suspicion that you've been mistaken for something far more political than spiritual. You say you've come to spread peace. What they see is another man in black robes arriving on a ship full of traders and guns. But you're here now, a Portuguese missionary, knee-deep in unfamiliar mud, asking questions in a language you don't fully speak, worshipping a God these people don't know and didn't ask for. You believe this is where you're meant to be. Maybe you're right, or maybe you're just the latest in a long line of well-dressed foreigners destined to vanish into the mist. Either way, the bell still rings, you still kneel, and the fire hasn't started yet. You think you're here as a missionary, a shepherd of souls, a bringer of light, but to the people watching you step into their streets, you're something else entirely. They see your Portuguese robes, your foreign face, your awkward gestures, and they place you in the only category that makes sense to them, merchant. Perhaps a peculiar one, perhaps unusually obsessed with death and wine and Latin incantations, but a merchant nonetheless. You arrived on a trader's ship after all. You ate with the crew. You followed the men who unloaded crates of textiles and muskets. If you're not buying or selling, then what exactly are you doing here? You tell them you've come to preach the truth. They nod, as if that's a perfectly normal thing to say. In your heart, you take that as understanding. In their minds, it's just more confirmation that you're a foreigner, and a slightly mad one. No one in Japan simply announces that they've come to reveal the ultimate nature of reality. People here do not advertise their convictions. They practice them quietly, often in forms so subtle that even their neighbours might not notice. And here you are, declaiming salvation like a street vendor, announcing cheap lacquerware. Your presence causes a ripple of polite discomfort. You walk through a market and the crowd adjusts. Not dramatically, just enough to avoid you. No one shouts, no one glares. They simply fade a few steps away, as if giving you more room to breathe, or perhaps to combust. Children whisper behind their sleeves. An old woman bows and walks in a perfect arc around you without making eye contact. You tell yourself, it's reverence, it's not. It's careful distance. You're an unknown quantity, and unknowns are dangerous. It doesn't help that you speak through an interpreter who used to work for a spice broker. He knows Portuguese well enough to negotiate prices, but not well enough to understand the theology you're throwing at him. You give him parables, he gives them idioms. You quote the Gospels, he summarises. When you try to explain the Trinity, he shrugs and says something about 3 powerful spirits sharing one house. The crowd seems content with that. You try to clarify, he waves you off. You're ruining the flow. You meet with local officials, and the meetings are polite, even warm. Tea is served. Questions are asked. You speak of Christ. They ask about your homeland, your king, your ships. You show them a crucifix. They admire the craftsmanship. You explain the Eucharist. They change the subject to musket production. You think they're deflecting. In fact, they're being practical. Foreign religions are tolerable, even amusing, so long as they don't disrupt the social order. But foreign influence, particularly the kind that comes with gunpowder, must be measured and contained. The daimyo is especially courteous. He grants you permission to stay, offers you space for your chapel, and even attends your first mass. You consider this a breakthrough, a sign of divine favour. What you don't realise is that he's simply hedging his bets. If your presence brings European trade, so be it. If it doesn't, you can be quietly expelled later. The daimyo has no interest in your god, but he has a great deal of interest in your countrymen's firearms, especially if they come with someone like you, mild, controllable, and useful. And then there's the matter of your name. You introduce yourself formally, using the Japanese name you were advised to adopt. You chose it carefully, after long consultation with other missionaries. You believe it strikes a balance between humility and authority. The locals mispronounce it immediately, smile kindly, and assign you a nickname behind your back that roughly translates to the man with the strange book. You don't find this out for several weeks. By then it's already stuck. You walk the streets expecting interest and find only politeness. You offer instruction and receive practiced nods. You interpret their silence as reverence, their hesitation as humility. But they are not trying to be converted, they're trying not to offend you. In Japan, open rejection is rare. That doesn't mean you're welcome. It means they're waiting to see if you'll go away on your own. One merchant brings you a gift, a small painted screen depicting Portuguese ships arriving with cargo. You hang it near your altar, thinking it's a gesture of friendship. It's not. It's a reminder. You are not here because of faith. You are here because of commerce. They may allow your presence, but they do not owe you understanding. You are part of a transaction, whether you admit it or not. At night, you write again. Letters to Lisbon, full of phrases like early signs of interest and open doors for evangelization. You believe you're planting seeds. What you don't see is that the soil hasn't accepted you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You end your letter with a prayer and a postscript, asking for more rosaries to distribute. You've handed out 6 already. You have no idea where any of them are now. The locals smile when you pass, they bow, they listen, and none of them trust you, not yet. Maybe not ever. Eventually you preach. You came all this way, from Porto to Lisbon to Goa to Macau to Japan, with the gospel in your hands and conviction in your chest. You are, by training and calling, a teacher of truth. And so you stand in your makeshift chapel beside the harbour, behind a wooden altar that still smells faintly of fish crates, and you speak. Your translator stands beside you, the same man who once negotiated bulk cinnamon prices and who now bears the burden of salvific interpretation. He is enthusiastic. That's about the only thing you share. You begin with something simple, something universal, the parable of the lost sheep. You quote scripture in Latin first, as you've been trained. The words are rich, familiar, sacred, and then you watch your translator tilt his head, pause for a moment, and render the entire passage into a few flat sentences about farmers and misplaced animals. There's no mention of sin, no metaphor, no divine shepherd. Just a kind of cautionary tale about watching where your goats wander. The crowd, about 9 people, mostly men who wandered in out of curiosity, listens politely. One of them leans against the wall and yawns, but discreetly. You press on. You speak of creation, of the fall of man, of a world in need of redemption. Your translator, to his credit, tries, but the idea of original sin doesn't land. The notion that everyone is born guilty sounds less like spiritual wisdom and more like a foreign insult. One old man furrows his brow as you explain Adam and Eve. You suspect he thinks you're recounting a family scandal. You decide to pivot. Christ's compassion, his healing, his humility. These should resonate. Japan values quiet strength after all. So you tell them about the Sermon on the Mount, about the meek inheriting the earth. Your translator simplifies again. You hear him mention the quiet ones becoming landowners, and you wince. You speak about turning the other cheek. He mutters something about patience during feuds. The meaning is getting through, but warped, like a reflection in river water, shaken by wind and time. You reach for resurrection. You shouldn't, but you do. It's a central tenet. You can't skip it. So you describe the crucifixion, the tomb, the third day. Your voice grows more fervent, which you immediately realize is a mistake. The translator slows, clearly trying to make sense of your rhythm. The listeners begin to shift. One glances toward the door. Another stares at your crucifix, like it's a puzzle with a missing piece. When the translator finally finishes his version of the resurrection, it comes out sounding less like a miracle and more like a medical complication. No one speaks, no one moves. A child coughs, a rooster crows somewhere outside. You consider skipping Pentecost altogether. Afterward, a few attendees thank you. One offers a bow, another a small parcel of dried fish. You accept both with a smile that feels like defeat. You ask your translator how it went. He hesitates, then assures you that everyone was very impressed. You don't believe him. But you say thank you anyway, because you're tired and hungry, and there's still Vespers to get through. Later you speak with a young man who stayed behind. He asks earnest questions, mostly about the crucifix. Why is the man suffering? Why doesn't your God have a sword? Why is your deity always dying? You try to explain that his death is the source of your hope. That pain was the price of salvation. That humility is sacred. The man frowns and says nothing. Then he bows, says goodnight, and leaves. You're not sure if you've planted a seed or scared him off forever. In private, you begin writing new homilies, simpler, slower, stripped of metaphor. You avoid theological jargon. You steer clear of anything involving serpents, virgin births, or eternal fire. You focus on kindness, charity, compassion. You tell yourself this is good strategy, that St. Paul became all things to all men, that Christ himself spoke in parables, but it still feels like you're sanding down the cross until there's nothing sharp left. Your Latin is meaningless here. You still whisper it during Mass because it comforts you, but to your listeners, it might as well be the muttering of a magician. You start offering translations into the local dialects, aided by handwritten glossaries and a Portuguese-Japanese phrasebook that misspells redemption as seasonal tribute. You do your best, you always do, but you can't shake the feeling that you're speaking into a fog, and not just a linguistic one. Every day you hope to find one person, just one, who truly understands what you're offering. Someone who hears your words and grasps the weight behind them. Some days you think you do. Other days, you wonder if you'd know the difference. Your chapel is still standing. Your altar is still clean. Your sermons are still happening. But your God is a stranger here. Revered perhaps, respected on good days, but not yet known. And in a land of many gods, many duties and many centuries of spiritual order, it's not clear if he ever will be. Eventually, one of the local lords grants you favour. A regional daimyo, whose name you've practiced saying 100 times and still only half pronounce correctly, agrees to let you build a small chapel on the edge of his territory. You're elated, you bow too deeply. You stumble through your thanks in ceremonial Japanese, then repeat them in Portuguese, just in case the message is clearer that way. This, you think, is the turning point, the moment when Christianity takes root in earnest. A nobleman has welcomed the gospel. The soil is ready, the harvest is coming. The chapel is little more than a wooden shed with a slanted roof and a crude cross carved from local timber. It stands just beyond the market, near a field of vegetables and a bend in the road that floods during rain. Still it is yours, a house of worship. You ring the bell every morning and hold mass with your few regulars, traders, 2 Japanese converts who may or may not believe anything you say, and 1 elderly fisherman who naps through most of the service. It's not a cathedral, but it's a beginning. Or so you tell yourself. The daimyo visits once. He steps inside the chapel with an entourage of samurai and administrators. You welcome him with a nervous bow and offer a short reading from Matthew, followed by an abbreviated homily on divine mercy. He listens politely, expression unreadable. When you finish, he nods once and walks out without saying a word. Later, his steward thanks you on his behalf and asks if you know when the next shipment of Portuguese arquebuses might arrive. You try not to let the question flatten your spirit. You begin to notice patterns. The daimyo permits your preaching, but he never discusses theology. He never asks about Christ or sin or salvation. What he does ask, frequently and with increasing urgency, is whether your countrymen can supply him with more weapons, matchlocks primarily, and the gunpowder they require. He inquires about European metalwork, naval design, and maps. He invites your ship's captain to dinner, but sends a servant to speak with you. You are the bridge, but not the destination. When the daimyo decides to convert, publicly, with a brief ceremony and a baptismal name you help him choose, you feel overwhelmed with gratitude. You write home immediately, describing the moment in glowing detail. A soul of great importance has accepted Christ, you say. You compare it to Constantine. You call it a breakthrough. And to you, in that moment, it is. But you don't mention that the ceremony took less than 15 minutes and was followed immediately by a meeting with Portuguese merchants to discuss a weapons exchange. Your new convert continues to visit the local shrine every week. He attends your mass exactly once more, flanked by guards who look deeply uncomfortable, standing in the back of the chapel. He nods as you speak, bows when it ends, and returns to his castle. You do not press the issue. You tell yourself faith takes time to mature, that it's better not to jeopardize the fragile progress you've made, that his heart will follow where his allegiance has already begun to lean. But somewhere deep beneath those justifications, another thought festers, one you try not to name too often, that you've become part of a negotiation you don't understand. Soon, other nobles take notice. A handful of lower-ranking retainers come to you asking for baptism. You prepare them carefully, instruct them in the creed, the commandments, the sacraments. You recite the catechism in slow-laboured Japanese. They nod at all the right places. They ask no questions. Then they convert, quickly, cleanly, without hesitation. Some of them even bring you gifts. One man, newly baptized as Paolo, presents you with a sword. Another promises to erect a shrine to Mary, though you later learn he meant an actual physical shrine, one modelled after the local Shinto style, complete with offerings of rice and oranges. Your congregation grows, but not in the way you expected. A few new believers trickle in, artisans, merchants, the occasional peasant, but most of the new faces are samurai, there at the behest of their lords. They sit quietly during Mass, hands on their knees, eyes forward. They bow when you pass them in the village. You try to speak with them after the service. They smile but say little. You don't know if they understand. You don't know if they care. But they're there, and that counts for something. At least for the letters home. The more conversions you record, the more anxious you become. You begin to wonder whether any of them are real, whether you've helped bring Christ to Japan, or whether you've simply handed out new uniforms in a political costume parade. But you write the reports anyway. Rome wants numbers. The society wants stories of triumph. You omit the hesitations, the odd rituals, the moments when a newly baptized Christian crosses himself and then bows toward a stone idol just outside the chapel door. You once imagined that spreading the gospel would mean facing resistance, maybe even persecution, and that your convictions would carry you through. You didn't expect indifference. You didn't expect your greatest victories to feel like theatre. You came to plant truth in fertile soil, but what you've built feels more like scaffolding on shifting sand, decorative, temporary, and quietly unstable. Still, you wake each morning, ring the bell, and preach. The daimyo allows it. The chapel stands. People keep coming. You don't know what they're hearing, but you keep speaking. Because if you stop, you're no longer a missionary. You're just a man in a strange land, surrounded by polite smiles and empty pews. The peasants begin to convert, slowly at first. A few show up outside your chapel during morning prayers. Heads bowed, eyes lowered, hands clasped with a kind of nervous uncertainty. You welcome them warmly. You offer blessings, sacraments, instruction. You prepare them for baptism with careful explanations, illustrated with gestures and drawings and simple phrases repeated until your throat goes dry. When they nod, you take it as understanding. When they smile, you take it as faith. When they ask for rice after the ceremony, you pretend not to notice the timing. Soon there are more. Entire families come forward. Mothers, children, elderly fathers with bowed legs and weather-beaten faces. Some are curious, some are terrified, some are simply following orders from the local magistrate, who strongly encourages cooperation with the foreign priest, especially now that the daimyo has converted. You baptize them all. You give them Christian names and keep careful records in a leather-bound ledger that you hide under your bed every night. You write to Lisbon about a new wave of devotion among the common folk. You don't mention the extra grain rations being handed out that week. The truth begins to show in subtle ways. One man, newly baptized as João, bows deeply after Mass and asks if the rosary he received can help his sick ox. A woman named Maria brings an offering of fish and places it before the altar, arranging it in neat, symmetrical rows, while murmuring a prayer that sounds suspiciously like something from the shrine down the road. You gently correct them, of course. You explain that Christ does not require food and that rosaries are not charms. They nod again, just like they did during catechism. The nods are always so quick, so eager, so empty. Some of the peasants are devout, or at least trying to be. One old man sits near the front of the chapel each morning and repeats your words in halting syllables. Another returns weakly to ask you the same question about forgiveness, as if hoping your answer will change. You cling to these moments. You treasure them. You need to, because they're the only things that still feel real. But for every sincere convert, there are 10 who clearly see the church as another part of village life, like the market, or the well, or the rice paddy. A place to visit, a role to play, a performance to give when the Lord's men are watching. Christianity, for them, is a matter of compliance, not conviction. And you can't blame them. Their lives are hard, their bellies are empty, their survival depends on the favour of men with swords. If kneeling before your altar helps feed their children, they'll kneel. If reciting prayers brings a coin or a sack of millet, they'll pray. Belief is a luxury they cannot afford. You try to adjust your teaching, you slow down, you repeat key ideas, you simplify. God is one. Christ died and rose. Salvation is a gift. You repeat these truths over and over, like pounding nails into damp wood. But still, you catch them crossing themselves the wrong way. Still, they whisper to the spirits of their ancestors before bed. Still, they light incense in front of your statue of the Virgin, as if she were a fertility goddess. You feel yourself slipping between joy and despair, between hope and weariness. You are saving souls, you think. But are you? Some converts become enthusiastic, too enthusiastic. A few begin preaching publicly, quoting scripture in broken phrases, denouncing local temples, smashing idols. One man lights a small fire outside a shrine and tries to declare the village cleansed. The local officials are not pleased. You are summoned to explain. You apologize profusely, insist the man misunderstood, promise that it won't happen again. It does, of course. You cannot control what people think Christianity is. You can barely control what you think it is anymore. A small group of peasants starts meeting in secret, not to hide from persecution, but to practice their own version of the faith, a mix of your teachings, local traditions, and stories passed around like old folk songs. You're invited once. They chant the Lord's Prayer in a way that sounds like a funeral hymn. They burn offerings to Yesu Sama alongside fruit and dried herbs. You don't know whether to correct them or weep. You leave before the end, and still the conversions continue. The numbers grow. Your chapel fills. The ledger swells with names. Rome will be pleased. Your superiors will send encouraging letters, commendations, maybe even funding for a larger chapel. They will see the success. You see the cracks. You see João still bowing to his ox after Mass. You see Maria lighting candles at the local shrine just before attending your service. You see the smile of the daimyo when he praises your work, a smile that never reaches his eyes. But what else can you do? You can't stop. You've given your life to this. You've crossed oceans, burned your bridges, sworn your vows. You are a missionary, and missionaries preach. So you keep preaching. You keep baptizing. You keep writing the names, saying the prayers, offering the sacraments. You hope that someday the conversions will sink deeper, that the faith will take root, that the nods will turn into understanding. But for now, they're just nods, and you're just a man, surrounded by echoes of a gospel you're not sure anyone really hears. You try not to think too hard about what your converts believe when you're not watching. You focus on the numbers, the names, the growing ledger of baptisms. You tell yourself, faith takes time, that doctrine can follow devotion, that hearts change slowly. But beneath the surface, something shifts. The polite nods grow cooler. The smiles grow thinner. The same villagers who once bowed as you passed now glance away just a second too late. You don't notice it at first, or maybe you do, and just don't want to admit what it means. The conversions continue, but the ground beneath your feet begins to harden. Not with open hostility, not yet, but with something colder. You call it resistance, but what you're beginning to walk into is a fence, and you've only just begun to cause it. At first you think it's just a misunderstanding, a minor lapse in etiquette, a cultural slip. You correct it, apologize, adjust your phrasing. You try to be respectful. You bow more deeply. You soften your sermons, but the tension doesn't lift, in fact it grows. What you don't realize, or maybe what you refuse to admit, is that you're no longer just a foreign oddity. You're a disruption, an insult, a walking contradiction in black robes. It begins with a funeral. A young convert dies, one of the few who seemed genuinely moved by the gospel. His family asks you to preside over the burial, which you agree to do, thinking it an honour. You conduct the rites as best you can, a simple prayer, a blessing, a wooden cross planted in the soil. There is no incense, no ancestral tablet, no offerings to the spirits. You call it Christian burial. His family calls it abandonment. That night, they return to the grave with food and prayers, whispering apologies to the soul they believe you've stranded. Word spreads, people talk, quietly of course. They always talk quietly here, but the murmurs accumulate. The foreign priest doesn't honour the dead. He doesn't respect the ancestors. He doesn't know how to treat a soul properly. Some begin to avoid your chapel. Others still attend, but no longer meet your eyes. A convert asks if she can keep her father's shrine in the house after baptism. You tell her no. She nods, and you never see her again. You try to explain. You preach on idolatry, on the difference between reverence and superstition. You speak of the one true God, the danger of graven images, the necessity of casting off false beliefs. You quote Deuteronomy with conviction. The translator fumbles through the verses, turning thunder into drizzle. The congregation sits in awkward silence. You think they're reflecting. They're not. They're trying to decide whether they've just been insulted. You preach against the festivals next. They're everywhere. Seasonal rites, harvest dances, rituals for rain, ceremonies for protection, colourful banners, joyful music, masked dancers. You watch them unfold with a growing discomfort, then decide to act. You warn your flock not to participate. You call the festivals distractions, corruptions, pagan entertainments that lead the soul astray. Your words land poorly. No one argues with you. They simply nod and continue as before. One day, during a walk through a village, you come across a roadside altar, a small wooden platform with offerings to a kami you've never heard of. You pause, pray for strength, and knock it over. You burn the wooden figures, stamp out the ashes, and leave a small cross in their place. You believe you've done something righteous. A few children watch you. One begins to cry. A day later, someone spits near your feet. You pretend not to notice. Your converts become nervous. Some stop attending Mass. Others come late and leave early. One young man returns his rosary and says nothing. Another begs you not to visit his home anymore. Not because he's fallen away, but because his grandfather grows angry when your name is mentioned. You try to comfort him, but he's already walking away. You want to believe this is persecution, that this resistance is proof you're doing something holy, but it doesn't feel holy. It feels like being pushed out of a house you were never invited into. The daimyo says nothing, but his silence has weight. He stops mentioning your chapel in public. The samurai who once attended your services no longer appear. One of your letters to Lisbon goes missing. Another is returned with a note asking you to write less politically. You wonder if your sponsor has grown tired of your updates. You wonder if your usefulness has reached its limit. In a moment of desperation, you gather your remaining converts and speak with urgency. You remind them of their promises, of the creed, of the sacraments. You tell them this is the narrow road, that the path of salvation is never easy. They listen politely. One of them asks if they can still light incense for their grandmother on her death day. You hesitate too long. The answer is no, of course, but by the time you say it, they're already gone. You begin to wonder what you've actually accomplished. The more you preach, the thinner the attendance. The more you purify, the more you isolate. You once dreamed of being a light in the darkness. Now you wonder if you've simply been striking matches in a forest that didn't ask to be set alight. You still ring the chapel bell. You still say your prayers. You still believe in your mission. But belief is starting to feel like stubbornness wearing holy clothes. You didn't come here to destroy anything. You came to save. But from where the villagers are standing, the line between those two is getting harder to see. They don't hate you. They don't fear you. They simply want you to stop, to go back to wherever it is you came from, to stop stepping on graves and telling stories that make no sense in a land already full of meaning. And slowly, reluctantly, you begin to understand. The tolerance you once mistook for acceptance is gone. It was never meant to last. And now, every bow feels a little shallower, every smile a little tighter, every silence a little heavier. You never meant to get involved in politics. You came to preach the gospel, not to navigate the ambitions of men with banners and armies. But you're in Japan, and Japan is changing. The wars that once kept the country fractured and distracted begin to quiet. A new order rises from the smoke. Disciplined, calculating, methodical. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man you've never met, and likely never will, begins the long process of unifying the land. And in his vision for Japan, there is no room for foreign gods, especially not yours. At first the changes are subtle. Fewer invitations from daimyo, fewer samurai at mass, a polite but firm letter from a regional magistrate informing you that public preaching will no longer be permitted in certain districts. The letter thanks you for your service. It wishes you continued health. It does not explain itself. It doesn't need to. The message is clear. You're being watched and not with curiosity. You keep preaching, of course, carefully, quietly. You limit your public sermons, hold private instruction in homes and storerooms, speak in a lower voice, keep fewer candles lit at night. You begin memorizing the names of your regulars, not just for their souls, but in case you need to warn them. You learn which paths avoid the main roads, which neighbours might report you, which houses have cellars. You stop wearing your full clerical robes in public. You still wear your crucifix, but now tucked beneath your collar. New laws are announced, decrees, proclamations, quietly passed down and quickly enforced. Christian missionaries are forbidden to proselytize. Japanese subjects are banned from converting. Existing converts are ordered to recant or face punishment. You hear rumours of Christians in other provinces being arrested, beaten, even executed, sometimes by fire, sometimes by drowning, sometimes by methods too creative to be described in polite company. You tell yourself these are exaggerations, isolated cases, misinterpretations. You know they're not. The daimyo who once supported you now avoids direct contact. His steward delivers messages, always courteous but always evasive. Your chapel is allowed to remain open, but only for foreigners, and only as long as you don't cause trouble. You nod, agree, comply. You keep the door open, but the windows shuttered. You whisper the Mass instead of singing it. You wonder how long the arrangement will last. One day, a local official visits your chapel during service. He sits silently at the back, says nothing, does nothing, and leaves without a word. 2 days later, your most outspoken convert is summoned to the castle for questioning. He returns pale and shaken, refuses to say what was asked. He stops attending Mass after that. You see him weeks later at a village festival, smiling and laughing, pretending you were never part of his life. You do not blame him. You would do the same, if you could. You begin to understand that your presence is no longer tolerated. It is simply being delayed. You are a problem, one that the new government is learning how to solve with increasing efficiency. To them, Christianity is not just another religion. It is foreign allegiance, a threat to unity, an ideology that suggests loyalty to something other than the shogun. You know this isn't your intent, but your intent no longer matters. Your sermons, your sacraments, your crucifix, they're all interpreted as tools of sedition. The pressure increases not with shouts but with silence. Fewer people attend your services. Some simply vanish. Others tell you they can no longer afford to be seen near you. They thank you quietly for your guidance and ask you to understand. You do. Every day you lose someone. Not always to fear, sometimes just to exhaustion. Being Christian in Japan is no longer inconvenient. It's dangerous. You receive word that other missionaries have been expelled. Some have been killed. Others have gone into hiding. You consider leaving. The thought comes to you late at night, when you stare at your candle and wonder what good your presence still serves. But you stay. Not out of defiance, not exactly. And not because you believe you'll succeed. You stay because leaving would feel like erasing the people who still cling to what you taught them. However confused, however compromised, however afraid. You know you're being watched. You know your letters are no longer reaching Lisbon. You keep writing them anyway. You begin keeping 2 versions of your records, one clean, hopeful, intended for a world that no longer responds, and one honest, hidden, meant only for your conscience. You dream of the sea sometimes, of the ship that brought you here, the wind on your face, the taste of salt, the sound of gulls. But you wake to the smell of damp wood and incense ash, to the hollow quiet of a chapel with more empty benches than souls. You were once a guest, then a curiosity, then a symbol. Now you are a liability, and still you stay. Not because you think it will save Japan, but because leaving would mean admitting it never could have been saved this way. Not by you, not like this. You tell yourself it won't get worse, that this is the bottom. Silence, suspicion, a congregation scattered by fear. You believe that maybe, with enough caution, you can keep going like this. Preach quietly, baptize discreetly, survive. But the new regime doesn't want silence, it wants submission. And when suspicion isn't enough, they start asking for proof. That's when they bring out the boards. A simple wooden plank, no larger than a serving tray, etched with the image of Christ or the Virgin Mary. It's called a fumier, a stepping picture, a test used by the authorities to root out Christians. If you step on the image, you're proving your loyalty to the shogunate. If you refuse, you're proving your faith and signing your death warrant. It's presented without ceremony, placed on the ground in front of someone you know, a fisherman, a seamstress, a child who once held the thurible during Mass. There are no sermons, no threats, no accusations. Just the official's calm voice instructing them to step. A test of loyalty, they say. A gesture of obedience, a symbol of order in a time when order is everything. The practice spreads quickly. The fumier appears in homes, markets, courts, temples. You hear stories from neighbouring villages, whispered warnings about those who refused and were never seen again, and about those who complied and who now walk around with eyes too wide and back slightly bent, as if their faith still clings to their heels. You see the first one with your own eyes during a raid on a convert's home. The man hesitates for too long. They offer him the board again. When he still doesn't move, they take him away. He doesn't scream. He just looks at you. Your own chapel is searched soon after. They find nothing. The crucifixes are hidden. The communion wine buried in sealed jars. The text locked behind false panels. You'd prepared for this. But the fumia doesn't need to be hidden. It travels with the officials, a tool as common now as a tax ledger. They do not ask you to step on it. Not yet. You're a foreigner, and technically still under the daimyo's limited protection. But the message is clear. It's only a matter of time. Your converts are not so lucky. They're rounded up in small groups, taken to central courtyards, brought forward one at a time. Some step without hesitation. Some step after a pause with shaking legs and clenched fists. A few fall to their knees and refuse. You hear about them later. They're not brought back. You ask questions and receive blank stares. You write their names in your ledger anyway, with little crosses beside them, even though you know no one will read it but you. For those who comply, life resumes, at least on the surface. But everything changes. They stop attending Mass. They stop praying aloud. Some stop speaking to you at all. You see the shame on their faces, not always because they stepped, but because they had to make the choice at all. You try to offer comfort. You remind them that Peter denied Christ 3 times. You speak of forgiveness, of endurance, of secret faith. They nod. They do not return. The ones who refuse are remembered in hushed tones. Not as martyrs, the word doesn't quite fit here, but as absences, as ghosts. Their homes are emptied, their belongings sold, their names erased from official records. You try to write them letters you never send. You keep their baptismal names alive in your prayers, whispering them each night like a litany against despair. You stop preaching openly. It's no longer possible. You begin holding secret gatherings in cellars, behind barns, in caves outside the village. No bells, no candles, no robes, just whispers. You say the Mass with broken wine and hidden bread. You bless children in silence. You hear confessions between walls. Your flock dwindles with each passing month. Some flee, some recant, some vanish. You lose track of how many. You wonder sometimes whether they were ever truly yours, whether the conversions meant anything, or whether they were always this fragile. You try not to let the thoughts settle. You focus on the work, the names, the rites, the silence. It's all you have left. You adapt to darkness. You become smaller. quieter, harder to find. You begin to understand what it means to serve a faith that cannot save you from pain. The daimyo no longer protects you. His alliance with your countrymen is under pressure. The shogunate wants control, and Christianity is now officially banned. You hear rumours of ships being turned away, of missionaries being expelled or executed. You write fewer letters. There's no one left to send them to. Your ink runs low. You use charcoal when you have to. You carve notes into wood when you run out of parchment. And then one day, a man you once baptized comes to you in secret. He asks to return. He stepped on the fumi-e, he says, but he never stopped believing. He weeps. You absolve him. You tell him that Christ forgives the fearful, that faith lives even in footsteps, that nothing, not even this, can separate him from grace. He nods. He asks you to bless his daughter. She watches from the shadows, her face, unreadable. You realize that you've become something else now, not a preacher, not a priest in the public sense, but a shadow carrying embers. You no longer measure success in converts or catechisms. You measure it in survival, in the handful who still come, in the ones who still believe, even if they cannot say it aloud, even if they sometimes stumble. The fumi-e remains. It will be used again, against your flock, against you. And when it comes, you will have to choose, not between God and death, but between shame and silence, between what you believe and what you're willing to let them see. The image on the board may fade with time, but the weight of that step never does. Your chapel burns in the middle of the night. You hear about it from a boy who runs to your door at dawn, out of breath and ash-streaked. By the time you reach it, there's nothing left but scorched timber and the scent of smoke still clinging to the air. The altar has collapsed. The cross is gone. A few villagers stand at a distance, staring with the blank expressions of people who know they shouldn't have come, but couldn't help themselves. No one speaks to you, no one offers help. The fire put itself out, they say. No one knows who lit it. You don't ask. You already know. It wasn't personal. It rarely is anymore. It was policy, unofficial perhaps, but understood. That chapel stood too long, and you stayed too long with it. Now it's gone, and soon you will be too. Not taken, not yet, but erased in slower ways. Your presence is no longer tolerable. It is a risk, not just to the government, but to anyone seen offering you kindness. A few days later, officials arrive at your quarters with a list. It's short, formal, and final. You are to surrender any Christian materials, cease all religious activity, and present yourself at the magistrate's hall for registration. You nod and thank them with a slight bow, your eyes lowered. Then, as soon as they're gone, you gather what you can. Your mass book, a few rosaries, a flask of wine, hidden in an oil jar. The rest you bury in the garden, under the stones where no one will think to dig. You do not register. Instead, you disappear. You shave your head. Not entirely, just enough to resemble the monks who wander the countryside, collecting alms and chanting sutras. You exchange your black robes for rough brown ones. You cut the hems unevenly and rub dirt into the folds. You adopt a different name. You begin to speak in proverbs and vague quotations. It's not a disguise exactly. It's an erasure. You learn to walk like someone no one wants to notice. Your mass is now held underground, literally. A storage cellar behind a carpenter's shop. A cave in the woods. A rice storehouse cleared out at night. You speak in whispers. You use scraps of cloth instead of vestments. You break bread in silence and pour wine in shadows. Your homilies are short, your prayers even shorter. You stop saying Amen out loud. You don't need to. They already know how it ends. Attendance is small, a handful of believers who still risk everything to hear your words. Most are quiet, some weep. One or two bring their children. They kneel on dirt floors and receive communion from your weathered hands, eyes closed, lips trembling. No one sings, no one dares. You no longer ask them to recite the creed. It's enough that they showed up. You write letters when you can, not the kind you used to write. Long, optimistic reports, full of baptism counts and polite appeals for funding. These are different. These are desperate. You write by candlelight on the backs of old scrolls, using ink made from soot and spit. You write to Lisbon, to Goa, to Rome. You describe the raids, the executions, the fumir, the chapel's ruin. You ask for help, reinforcements, protection, even acknowledgement. You send them through secret couriers or travelling merchants who might still be sympathetic. Most are never heard from again. Your crucifix stays hidden now, sewn into the lining of your robe. You touch it often, not for comfort, but for reassurance, to make sure it's still there. You dream of the sea sometimes, of ships with white sails, of escape, of a return to a world where God is not outlawed and bread is broken without fear. But when you wake, it's to the sound of dogs in the distance, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, is reporting a stranger seen near the woods. You change lodging frequently. No one shelters you for more than a few days. It's too dangerous. Even feeding you is a risk. You sleep in abandoned huts, storehouses, old shrines long since reclaimed by vines. You eat what's given, which isn't much. Rice if you're lucky. Root vegetables. Occasionally, dried fish. Hunger becomes normal. You forget what it was like to be full. You start to lose track of the days. You mark them by moonlight, by frost, by the number of times someone recognizes you and quickly looks away. You speak less and less. Silence becomes the default. Your prayers turn inward. You no longer ask for protection, only endurance, only the strength to keep speaking the words, even if no one is left to hear them. Once you see a man you baptized years ago. He's wearing a Buddhist amulet and leading a festival procession. You think of calling to him, you don't. He catches your eye for a second, and in that second, you see everything. The fear, the guilt, the resignation. You lower your head and pass by. You are no longer a priest in any official sense. No one lists your name. No one waits for your reports. You exist on the margins, sustained only by habit and fragments of faith. You are a whisper in a forest, a ghost who still believes he's human. And yet even now, when someone knocks softly at the storehouse door and asks for prayer, you answer. You always answer. Because this, whatever this has become, is still your calling. And even buried in silence, the word still burns. It doesn't come with warning. Not really. There's no pounding at the door, no angry mob, no public denunciation shouted through the streets. There's just a quiet knock in the middle of the night, and then 3 men standing in the dark, their robes damp from mist, their faces blank with purpose. They don't raise their voices. They don't draw weapons. They don't need to. You know what this is? They ask you to come with them. Not in a violent way, just as if they're escorting you to an appointment that's already on the schedule. You don't resist. There's no point. You gather your things, your satchel, your crucifix, the worn cloth you use as an altar covering, and follow. They don't shackle you. That would make too much noise. You're not entirely surprised. You've known this was coming. It's been coming since the chapel burned, since the fumir first appeared, since the daimyo stopped sending messages and your letters stopped getting replies. What surprises you is the quiet, the utter lack of spectacle. You'd always imagined, in the deepest corners of your mind, that your arrest would be dramatic, that you would be dragged into the street, held up as an example, condemned in the public square. But no, there is no crowd, no shouting, just the sound of sandals in the dirt, and your own breath in your ears. They take you to a building on the edge of town, a place you've passed before, without noticing, nondescript, windowless. Inside it smells like damp straw and iron. You're offered water, a mat to sit on. A guard closes the door behind you, not with a bang, but with the soft finality of something well practiced. They don't ask about your faith. Not at first. They ask about names, who you've met, where you've travelled, how long you've been in the country. You answer carefully, truthfully, when you can. You try to protect the others without lying. You phrase things in ways that keep your answers technically correct and spiritually harmless. They nod, write things down. They are not angry, they are thorough. Eventually the questions change. They ask where you've held services, who attended, who still believes. The tone never shifts, always quiet, always polite. One of them thanks you for your cooperation. Another brings you a bowl of rice you haven't eaten in a day and a half, and it takes everything in you not to devour it too quickly. You ask for news from Lisbon. They smile and say nothing. Then comes the pain. Not all at once. First it's sleep deprivation, long hours in silence, the same questions repeated with slight changes in phrasing. Then the cold, no blanket at night, a window cracked just enough to let the wind crawl in. Then restraints, not chains, just ropes, tied too tightly, for too long. Then fire. You learn what the underside of your own skin smells like. You bite down on cloth to keep from crying out. They are not cruel, not in the emotional sense. They are methodical, patient. This is their work, and they do it with the precision of craftsmen. One man adjusts your bindings like a weaver setting a loom. Another apologizes as he places coals near your feet. It's not personal. They even say so. You believe them. Eventually, you talk. Not everything, not everyone, but some. A name slips, a location, a time of day. You hate yourself for it. You try to justify it as strategy, as self-preservation, as a way to protect the greater good. But none of that helps when you see the list they're writing grow longer. You wonder if any of them will be arrested. You wonder if they already have been. You begin to realize that you're not the last, you're just the next. They ask you to step on the fumier. It's laid out gently, with care, as if they're offering you a chance to dry your feet after rain. You stare at the image, Christ's face, etched with familiar lines, worn by hundreds of previous feet. You do not move. One man sighs, another adjusts the lighting. You're given time. They want this to be your choice. You refuse, but you don't do it dramatically. There's no speech, no fire in your eyes. You just lower your head and shake it. They nod. The board is taken away. Your legs are retied. A cup of water is placed beside you. That night, you sleep without interruption. They start again the next morning. You are hoping for a delay, a pause, some signal that your refusal to step on the fumi had granted you a strange kind of respect, or at least a moment of stillness before the next wave. But no, there's no satisfaction in your defiance, no moment of dignity. Just the scrape of the door, the quiet order to stand, and the return of questions you already failed to answer. At first you try silence, not just because you're protecting anyone, though you are, but because there's so little left to say. They already know the basics, where you came from, what you've preached, who's been baptized. They want more detail now. Times, locations, families, children. You hold your tongue because that's what you were trained to do. The church prepares you for this, theoretically. The saints endured worse, you were told. Pain is temporary, truth is eternal. You tell yourself that again now, even as your hands are bound behind your back, and the ropes are tightened just a little too far. They're not hasty. They don't shout. They apply pressure the way a craftsman might bend bamboo. Slow even, careful not to splinter it unless necessary. They tilt your body until your shoulders burn. They tie your legs until your toes swell and throb. They starve you gently, just enough to weaken your thoughts. When you pass out, they let you rest. When you wake, they ask the same questions again, and again, and again. Their patience is bottomless. Yours is not. You pray. Of course you pray. At first the words come easily. Psalms, prayers of endurance, even fragments of Latin liturgy whispered beneath your breath. but eventually the words start to slip. You forget verses, you jumble phrases, you begin repeating the same half-sentence over and over, not for meaning, just for rhythm. You ask for strength, you ask for guidance, you ask for something, anything, that feels like presence, but all you get is the echo of your own voice and the rustle of straw beneath your knees. The days blur. You lose track of how long you've been in this cell. The light never changes. The food, when it comes, is bland and colourless. Water tastes like smoke. You begin to hallucinate. You think you see the Virgin's face in a crack in the wall. You think you hear the sound of Mass being sung outside your cell, though you know that's impossible. You tell yourself these are holy visions. Then you tell yourself they're delusions. Then you stop trying to tell the difference. One afternoon, or maybe it's evening, you slip. You say a name, just one. It happens so fast you don't register it until it's already left your mouth. You see the nod, the quiet note taken, the satisfied glance exchanged between interrogators. The next day, another name slips, then a place, then a date. The more you speak, the easier it becomes. Not because you want to betray anyone, you don't, but because holding it all inside has become unbearable. The weight of memory, of secrecy, of names spoken only in whispers for so long becomes too heavy to carry. You start dropping them one by one, like stones from your pockets. You tell yourself they already knew, that your silence wasn't saving anyone, that what you're doing now is a form of mercy, a controlled confession, trimming your answers to protect the most vulnerable. But you know better. You're not negotiating, you're unraveling. They thank you for your cooperation. They offer you a blanket. Your ropes are loosened. They give you broth that tastes like memory. For a moment, it feels like absolution. Then one of them places the fumi at your feet again. You stare at it for a long time. You think about all the people whose names you've just given, about the converts who once called you teacher, about the children baptized in your hands. You step. Nothing happens, no thunder, no divine silence. The guards remove the board without a word. The only sound is your own breath, heavier now, and the whisper of fabric as you sit back down. They stop questioning you after that. There's no need. The report is finished. The papers are stamped. Your usefulness is spent. You're no longer a missionary or even a threat. You're just a name in a file now. The last entry in a long and failed experiment. You wonder what will happen to those you named. You picture them being questioned like you were, tied like you were, tested in ways they may not survive. You hope they're smarter, that they fled, that they changed their names, burned their books, forgot your face, that they survived this because they never learned to trust you too much. You try to pray again that night, but the words don't come. Not from lack of faith exactly, more like exhaustion. You're so tired of speaking to a silence that doesn't respond. So you sit, you breathe, you touch the edge of the blanket they gave you, and you try not to think about anything. Not the mission, not the church, not the names you gave, just the sound of your own heart, still beating for now. You're not saved, you're not safe, but you've given them everything they wanted, and that makes what comes next simpler. They won't have to torture you again. They don't even need to hate you. All they need to do is finish what they started. And they will. There is no sentence read aloud, no proclamation, no great procession or dramatic trial. One morning, the door to your cell opens without warning, and 2 guards stand waiting with ropes. There is no rage in their faces, no pleasure. They've done this before. You're not an enemy. You're just one more problem being quietly removed. They let you walk on your own, which almost feels kind. Your ankles are weak, your feet numb. You've spent too many weeks sitting, shrinking. The hallway is narrow and silent, walls stained with old mildew and prayer. You don't ask where you're going, you already know. They do not take you to a square. There is no crowd. You are not being made into an example. That would suggest you're still dangerous. You are not. You are an inconvenience, a failed idea, a ghost being ushered out of history as efficiently as possible. Outside the compound walls, near a wooded edge, they lead you to what looks like a well. It's a narrow pit, lined with timber, barely shoulder width across, and a little over 6 feet deep. You stop walking. One of the guards glances at you, then shrugs as if to say, "Yes, this is it." You've heard of this, whispered rumours among the prisoners and faint mentions in letters you once smuggled. Ana Tsurushi, hanging in the pit. It was designed for people like you, not to punish, but to erase. They strip you to the waist, bind your ankles, bind one wrist, the other arm, perversely, is left free. They say it's to show mercy. In case you decide to signal a recantation, they want you to step on the fumie in your final hour, to give them that final clerical victory. And so one hand is left unbound, as if that choice still belongs to you. Then they hang you, upside down, by your ankles into the pit. They lower you slowly, head first, body dangling just above a layer of waste and soil. The pit is deep enough that sound doesn't travel well, shallow enough that you remain visible to your keepers. You're placed over a wooden lid with a crescent-shaped hole. Your shoulders squeeze through, and then your torso, until only your hips rest against the frame. The lid closes around your thighs, keeping you in place, like a cork in a bottle. Then they leave. At first there is only blood, rushing to your head, pressure behind your eyes. Your ears ring like cathedral bells after a funeral. Breathing becomes a struggle, not from suffocation, but from your own lungs pressing upward. The muscles in your neck begin to scream. Your shoulders spasm. Your free arm twitches, lashes out, clutches the side of the pit wall in blind instinct. You try to pray. You can't. There's no air to spare. Time becomes incoherent. A few hours maybe a day, maybe more. You drift in and out of lucidity. Sometimes there is light above the lid, sometimes dark. Sometimes a guard lifts the cover and peers down. You try not to look back. At one point, they lower a rope near your free hand. A choice, an invitation. All you have to do is signal. All you have to do is renounce what's left. You do not reach for it, not out of bravery, but because you can't lift your arm anymore. Eventually, something ruptures. You're not sure what, a vessel, a memory, a part of yourself. You begin hallucinating. You think you hear mass. You think you see your students. You see your mother once, standing just outside the pit, shaking her head. You ask her if she's come to take you home. She does not answer. You begin to lose your sense of self. You are no longer a man, no longer a priest. You are just weight, inverted, sinking into the earth one breathless hour at a time. They do not wait for you to die. They check periodically, and when you stop reacting, they bury what's left. Quietly, somewhere behind the compound, in a plot with no marker, no relics, no grave, no name. You do not become a memory. That would imply someone was still thinking of you. When the soil closes over your body and your name disappears from every ledger, life continues without pause. The officials clean out your pit and use it again. The guards assigned to your case are rotated to other duties. You are never mentioned again in any official report. And in Rome, no one petitions to have you sainted. You are too quiet in death, too ordinary in failure. The church doesn't even know which village you died in. They think you may have drowned. But the faith you brought, fractured as it was, does not entirely die with you. In scattered villages and crumbling coastal hamlets, a few of your former converts remain. They survive by not speaking, by not remembering out loud, by not calling it Christianity. They continue in fragments, half prayers, borrowed chants, gestures without context. They know to kneel at the right time, but not why. They hold ceremonies to mark births and deaths that look Christian, but sound entirely foreign to the ears of Rome. They baptize with no priest. They confess to no one. They bury their dead with little wooden crosses marked in ash and whisper names they no longer pronounce properly. They are not following the gospel. They are following the shape of it. Icons are hidden behind household altars. Mary becomes a local goddess. Christ is sometimes pictured with a top knot. Candles are lit in basements at night, while Buddhist prayers are chanted above. For outsiders, they keep up appearances, attend temple festivals, offer incense, bow where expected. But below the surface, something else lingers. It doesn't shine, it doesn't speak, it doesn't even call itself holy, but it persists. These people call themselves Kakure Kirishitan, hidden Christians, though they never use that term aloud. Most of them no longer remember the creeds. They do not know who Peter was. The sacraments are misremembered, the calendar is off, and the theology, if you could call it that, is an echo of a whisper. Still, they pass it down. Not because it brings them joy or clarity or even hope, but because it was given to them. And to discard it would be to sever something ancient, even if they no longer know what. You are not part of this version. No one mentions your name. No child is named after you. No old man tells the story of the Portuguese priest who arrived by boat. You do not live on in legend or song. Your face was never carved, your robes never preserved. You were not beloved, you were not hated, you were simply present, and then you were not. Centuries pass. When Japan is reopened to the world, foreign Christians arrive again. Different robes, different languages, more prepared this time. They begin searching for remnants of the old faith. They expect to find nothing. But in dusty homes and mountain villages, they are greeted by old women who offer ritual water, chant Latin-sounding prayers that no longer exist in any book, and kiss crucifixes carved from driftwood. They ask where these practices came from. The villagers do not know. They say only, "It was taught to us by the ancestors, from long ago, from when the men from across the sea came." No names, no years, just that. The church is stunned. They call it miraculous. They say the faith survived centuries without priests. But it didn't. Not really. What survived was a husk, a shell of ritual, hollowed out by time, bent around necessity. It is not theology, it is heritage. And it is dying. Most of the descendants do not return to Catholicism. Some convert formally, when it becomes legal again. Others abandon it altogether. Some keep a little of both. Attend Mass on Sunday. Bow before the household gods on Monday. The distinction doesn't seem important anymore. You are not mourned. No one goes looking for your grave. If it still exists, it is under some warehouse or hillside, unmarked. You are part of no canon, no story, no shrine. Your life was not a beginning. It was an interruption, a brief moment of foreign flame that flared, confused, and went out. And yet, somewhere, in some old home, there is a grandmother who still crosses herself before cooking rice, just in case. Somewhere, a wooden statue with unfamiliar features is dusted weekly, kissed by a child who doesn't know the name for it. Somewhere, a prayer is whispered in mangled Latin, not because it means anything anymore, but because it always has been. You are gone, but the shape you left behind, crooked, fragile, empty, still casts a shadow. And for now, in this quiet corner of the world, that is enough. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. If you're still awake, thank you for walking the quiet paths of a vanished mission with me, for kneeling in cellars, whispering forgotten prayers, and bearing witness to a life that faded without ceremony. If you'd like early access to more of these slow, heavy histories, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with other forgotten lives you'd like to see uncovered. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well,